Welcome to Comic Culture. I'm Terence, a professor in the Department of Mass Communication at the University of North Carolina at Pembroke. My guest today is Eric Grissom, the writer of such books as Animals, Dead Horse, and his newest book from Action Lab Entertainment, Planet Gigantic. Eric, welcome to Comic Culture.
Hi, Terence. Thanks for having me on.
So let's get started. How did you get started in comic writing?
I've always kind of wanted to write comics, but for years I didn't. I mean, Dead Horse is actually the first comic that I ever did, and I started that in 2009. So while I love the form and that form, kind of storytelling, I had been writing a lot of sketches and a lot of scripts, short stories, more that kind of thing. But lucky for me, I ended up having a video game store that was right next to Phil Sloan, who's a brilliant artist. So the two of us together started to talk about comics a lot, and then I had this idea for Dead Horse that I'd actually played around with, whether it was going to be a short story or even a short film or something. I got in my head that it would make a really cool comic. I kept pitching him. He kept saying no, but I was persistent, and I finally broke his will. And that was the first thing, the first comic that I had written. And once I got into that, I just, fell in love with it. It's like, perfect form of storytelling. The marriage of words and pictures and using still imagery to tell that kind of story. With comics, at least from a writer's perspective, because you're not actually doing the drawing, you really are only limited to your own imagination. I mean, granted, you got to find someone like Phil Sloan, which is not easy. But if you can do that, you can find a partner to work with. I mean, there's no telling what you can create.
Well, you mentioned finding a partner. Now, a lot of the folks that we've spoken to, a lot of the writers, say that they work in the sort of the full script because, like, some artists aren't assigned to the book yet if it's a bigger publisher. Now, you worked with Phil Sloan ahead of time, or spoke to him ahead of time. Was this something where it's more of a true collaboration, or was this something where you just said, I've got this great idea, and presented him a finished copy?
Yeah, I think any time you make a comic, and if you're the writer and you're not drawing it, it is a collaboration, regardless whether or not it's full script or not. I mean, everything that I do is full script, so I am doing panel breakdowns, and I'm plotting it and doing all that stuff on my own, usually alone in a darkened room. But the minute that you hand the script to another human being, it's no longer yours. They're creating it with you. I mean, sometimes you do, and I'm only working creator-owned stuff. So I'm not doing licensed properties. I have yet to work with an artist that's been assigned to the project. So this may change, when you get into some of the, more corporate-ended comic books. But for us, it's a complete collaboration. Even though the story is me, and even though I'm driving a lot of the creative direction of the thing, it's a joint project, whether it's Animals with Claire or David Halverson and I that did Planet Gigantic. I mean, I'm coming up with these characters, sure, but they're words. I mean, it's fiction. Until, I'm not designing the characters. I'm not handing someone a character sketch of this is how this person's going to look. My story's being interpreted through that artist's hands and brains and everything else. So I do see a lot of times that artists or writers, will say like created by and then the writer's name, and then you have like the illustrator. And it's, unless you're drawing the thing, it's a co-creation from the get-go. Otherwise, just write fiction.
Now, have you ever handed your script off and you get the artwork back and you feel compelled to make some changes based on, oh, this was more effectively told in the picture than I had originally envisioned it, and I'm just going to make some tweaks to it?
Yeah, I mean, I try not to. You'll have to talk to the artists that I work with. I'm sure that they may have a different way of describing it. I try to be, understanding, and they're obviously better at visually displaying the story, telling the story visually than I am. If I feel like it affects the story, or if there's a specific reason why we need an image and words together in that panel, I'll make the case for it. But I tend to think that a lot of the times that I'll do something and it'll come back and it's better than what I was thinking. But I certainly will make suggestions or, fight for something that I believe in. And I've done the most comic work with Phil. And we go back and forth, and there's stuff that I'm sure I'm a pain about, and there's probably stuff that he's a pain about. but it's definitely a collaboration in that regard. But to answer your question, certainly, if something isn't working or I feel it's not working, I make my case for it. And if they have a counterpoint that makes more sense, then maybe that's the better way to do it.
Okay, now, with the exception of Planet Gigantic, your work has been self-published
Yes.
under the
Frankenstein's Daughter.
Frankenstein's
yes.
Daughter
Yep.
imprint,
Right.
and that's your company. How do you go about basically getting the book from your ideas to the printed page?
Because I'm self-publishing, I'm doing all of that. So it'll go from the ideas of when I'm going to have this idea, and then I usually will script something out. Then I will pitch an artist and say, if I feel like they're a good fit for the book, or in some cases the artist will approach me and they want to work with me, and I'll give them the idea. Then it goes to them, and then I'll start getting inks back to do comments on it and whatnot, or I'm sorry, pencils back, and then we'll work until the inks are finished. At that point, I also do the lettering of the book, which for me as a writer, when I give a script to an artist, that's still a draft for me. I do so much rewriting when I'm lettering. And because at that point you actually have the art, you can really see how the words are going to fit on the page, how the story is going to be told. Like, lettering is a wonderful thing that I don't think I could ever give up. I had no idea how to do it before. I taught myself, using Illustrator, and there's a ton of resources. So if anyone is watching this and they, don't think that they can do it, you can go to, I think it's balloontails.net. Which basically will tell you just about anything that you can want to do. Comicraft also has an amazing book. So in that sense, right from the end product, lettering the thing, then you're producing the PDFs, and then you just, right now, I mean, with Comixology for digital, with a ton of print-on-demand services that they have, there's nothing really stopping you, as long as you don't expect to make any money. You could remove money from the situation and you're okay with losing a lot of it. There's nothing to stop you from self-publishing. Like, there's so many channels. You can easily get your book on Amazon. When I deal with local comic stores, I'm not going to go through Diamond. I'm not going to do those kind of numbers. I'm just not going to happen. But you set up relationships with these stores by just contacting them. And so for us, I mean, I think I have Dead Horse in about 6 or 7 stores around, mostly in the United States. We have a couple of stores in Canada. But I'll just ship them to them. You just establish a relationship with these people, and then all of a sudden you're a publisher. And it's such a great time. And Comixology really changed the way digital works. It's a lot easier now. I get a quarterly statement. I can see how well my book's doing. I can run promotions with them. It's been really great.
Well, as far as Comixology goes, for those who aren't familiar with Comixology, it's a digital platform for comics, and basically I believe there's an app involved as well that you can have it on your phone or your tablet, where you can just read comics from their library. You have to pay for the different issues. But when you get your book on Comixology, are you paying Comixology to be hosted on their site, or is this something where it's consignment sort of?
It's basically you post it to them. There's no cost or anything. When they sell it, it used to be a little bit different. Comixology used to be an independent company that had an app on like iOS, so iPads, iPhones, what have you. When you would sell a book, Apple would take 30%. They take 30% of everything that's sold through iOS, so that goes into Apple's pocket. Then Comixology would take half of that, and the creative team would get the remainder. Since then, Amazon bought Comixology. They dismantled the pay inside the app or in-app purchasing from the app. So now you have to actually go to the Comixology website. You buy it. You do make a little bit more because now they're taking half of it from the top, and then you get the other half. So that 30% that went to Apple is now going, between the two of you. You can make an argument, well, now it's not as easy to buy the comics, so, which is the better approach? We'll see as, time goes by, and we could see how the sales are doing. But that's it. There's no upfront costs or anything like that. As long as you're supplying, the proper PDF that meets the specs that they outline, you're up and running. I mean, they are a bit of gatekeepers. You can't just put anything on there. You have to go through an approval process. They have to approve the work. They have to look, You make sure that your comic is up to par. I know some people have had very long wait times too from the moment that they submit to Comixology till it actually appears. We've been very fortunate. They've always worked with us, and it hasn't been that long, from the time that I submit the book till it actually shows up.
That's interesting. Now, you talk about a gatekeeper function. I was reading through the Animals series, and you have some images in there that are, I guess, cartoon nudity.
Yes.
And is that something that Comixology would frown upon, or are they looking more for something, prurient and pornographic?
Right. I don't know. It's interesting you brought that up, because I was worried in the second issue of, and to give just a little thing about Animals. Animals is basically a world run by animals in which humans are eaten for food. So as you said, in the second issue in Pigs, you do see sort of humans hanging on hooks and whatnot. And it's striking imagery done by Claire Connolly, who's the artist on that book, and there's full frontal nudity in there. So I did worry. You don't know is that somebody just wasn't paying attention, or is that okay? Because it's at least before they were bought, when it was going through Apple, I think Sex Criminals, I know, was pulled. But I think that came out, that Comixology pulled it before Apple did. But the rules about what is considered pornographic, what is art, what isn't art, are very murky. So I don't have a definitive answer as to why it wasn't pulled, or why, it shouldn't have been, or should. For me, there's no reason for it to be pulled. Right. There's nothing, it's a piece of artwork that's making a statement. But that's neither here nor there. I'm surprised at some of the stuff that they do pull.
Well, before we get too much further into Animals, because I do want to talk about that book, just wanted to wrap up with Comixology. Now, when you present a book to Comixology and they make it available for download and whatnot, how much do you get, how much of the marketing are you doing? Because it reminds me of the old days in the 90s when I'd play in bands. You'd have to go around with your mailing list to send out postcards to people to get them to come to your next show, and they never would, which is why I'm here today.
Yeah,
so
that's it, yeah.
So is it something where you're able to use social media to draw traffic to Comixology?
Yes, it's so depressing. This is the part of the thing that I just don't like. But yeah, you constantly have to be pimping yourself. Like, they're not really going to do any marketing. They do some marketing for you. Like, once in a while, Comixology is very good at putting together these bundles where they'll highlight, Submit is the name of their program. So if anyone's interested, that's what you would look for. And that's for self-published books. So within Comixology, there's this Submit program, and once in a while they'll package a bunch of books together and put it on sale, and then advertise that or market that, and that'll usually give you a spike in sales. But for the most part, you're right. It is like having a band. You have to go out there and you have to do interviews and podcasts and whatever you think you can do. That means tweeting out reviews all the time if people review your stuff, and it drives you nuts. Because you feel like an awful human being to constantly, like, this narcissistic monster that's just constantly like, read this thing, And so I go back and forth with, like, no, I'm going to be a weird hermit, and I'm not going to say anything, and the work's going to sell on its own, and it's all about the work, and I want to divorce myself from that. To the opposite of, like, no, if nobody's talking about this thing, I got to start talking about it, because no one's going to care as much as you do. So it's a balancing act. But yeah, you have to be a marketer, you have to be the publisher, you have to be, the editor. You're doing everything. Well,
let's just hope that your enthusiasm for writing isn't tempered by the seedy business side of it.
Yes. Yeah.
So I just wanted to go back to, again, talking about Animals. Now, what I was taken by was, it seems to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, that this is a book that's designed to make us think about the way that we treat animals that we consume, and that we lack a certain compassion, and that if we were to put ourselves in their position, we probably wouldn't like it. And I'm just wondering where you were coming from when you were writing this book.
Sure. I mean, this particular book, like, I'm a vegetarian, so the treatment of animals is an important issue for me. I had just read Slaughterhouse, which is by Gail Eisnitz. I think I'm pronouncing her name right. So even so that was a huge inspiration for wanting to do that book anyway. So I wanted to show, I had a couple of different ideas too about about doing that book. And one of them was going to be completely from sort of the human's perspective, being in the slaughterhouse and everything, and then seeing the animals as more as periphery characters. But then it occurred to me it would be a lot more powerful if we made the animals us. You know, they were the people we're going to focus on. We were going to see them not as villains, but as ourselves, and then really see see the way that we treat animals through their eyes. But I also didn't want that to be the whole thing. I wanted it to be very human, which is funny because the humans aren't the focus of it, but as animals. So the main storyline, at least in the first two books, are really about these small knit communities or these families or how people are interacting with each other. You know, in the first book, there's a single mother and her two kids sort of trying to get by in a boarding house. In the second one, you sort of see a marriage start to dissolve and how they're sort of dealing with that. So it really is about humans and family and everything else, and I think that's kind of a theme that I'm trying to run through a lot of the stuff that I'm writing anyway. And the horrible, ominous slaughterhouse is always sort of in the background, and we get closer and closer to it as the book progresses.
And like I said, what I was taken by was the fact that you have, in Pigs in particular, you've got the lead character who works at the slaughterhouse and just loses his ability to work there, and then goes out of his way to try and protect some escaped, I guess, humans or animals, whatever you want to call them. And at the end, he ends up with a baby.
Yeah.
And it was just, I thought, very, very interesting because, again, you said you're a vegetarian, and it's a very fine line between, you know, people who think that vegetarians, and I live with one, are too preachy and, you know, and trying to just make a point that everyone can sort of enjoy. And I realize this isn't much of a question, but it is a balancing act between trying to make a point and not to sound preachy, and I think you were able to achieve that in this series.
Yeah, well, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I did not want it to be preachy in that sense. You know, I just wanted it to be real. I mean, in that book is intended to be 4 parts. So the third part that isn't out yet and I'm still working on is going to be about cows, and that's more of the business perspective, to give the perspective of the people that are running the slaughterhouse and how they're trying to keep up with the economic conditions that are going on. So yeah, I wanted to sort of give a more objective view of that industry and how people interact with it. So I'm glad that you said that.
Yeah, and I also think the way that the art is put together, it's put together in a very approachable way, but at the same time, there's the stark black and white nature of it is very jarring. You know, so you have these sort of cute anthropomorphized animals, but at the same time, it's that stark imagery, the black and white. There's no grays, there's no other tones in there, and I think that again matches the tone beautifully with what you've written. And
thank you. And that's Claire Connolly, and she's an amazing writer artist in her own right. So I'm just very happy that she agreed to do that book with me.
And again, that's got to be difficult where you're pitching the idea to the artist, and I'm assuming that she's got other projects that she has to work on that might be, you know, if you're funding this yourself, you probably don't have the biggest budget in the world to pay an artist to spend.
Right. And with her, like, I really lucked. I mean, I had been a fan of her work before, and with that one, I couldn't find I didn't know even where to look for an artist, and I ended up posting something on my blog about having that story and looking for someone, and she contacted me, which was great because I had already been a fan of her work. So it was like a perfect, you know, situation that I fell in with that. And we just been having a lot of fun doing the book together, and so far we've gotten a lot of critical acclaim over it, and it just seems to be going pretty well.
Okay, well, we're going to go on to Planet Gigantic, which is your latest work, which is coming out from Action Lab. So you've been self-publishing, and you still continue to self-publish. What made you choose to go to Action Lab to get Planet Gigantic out there?
Well, with most of this stuff, I mean, I'm self-publishing because no one's going to tell me that I can't make books. But that's not always my goal. Like with Dead Horse.
Okay, it looks like we're having a few moments of technical difficulties here. While we wait for our connection to come back. Why don't we take a couple of moments to take a look at a few commercial messages, and we'll be right back after this brief interruption.
Hey, this job looks perfect. It says you need people skills?
Check.
Driver's license?
Check.
And a high school diploma or GED.
Skip the drama. Get your GED.
I got that.
You are good to go.
Take that first step towards a better future and sign up for free classes now at yourged.org.
Hart, what's going on?
I'm leaving.
Why? What did I do?
Not enough. The pressure's too much. I quit.
I get it. I can do better. Just
Please, don't leave.
Don't let your heart quit on you. Get your uncontrolled high blood pressure to a healthy range before it's too late.
Danse, balance, suis la cadence, ondule bien tes hanches, au bal du dimanche. Danse, que la fête commence, dans ma belle robe blanche, je suis ton chou, ton
You didn't give up on sex. Don't give up on birth control either. There are more methods than you think. Find yours at bedsider.org.
Often, books are just tossed around. However, over 6 million in North Carolina, 30 million in America, and 774 million globally all have one thing in common: illiteracy.
If you store your guns properly, I'll feel safer when I'm playing outside.
Safer when walking home.
And I won't have to tell my kids, this isn't a drill.
Never let your gun get into the wrong hands. Always lock it up.
Welcome back to Comic Culture. We're sorry for the technical problems before. We're talking to Eric Grissom about his new book, Planet Gigantic. And before we were interrupted, we were asking Eric about going to Action Lab to get published after being self-published for so long.
Yeah, basically, self-publishing is something I like to do. As I said before, like, no one's going to stop me from making. I'm not going to wait for someone's permission to put a book out, but it's not always my #1 goal. I would love to not have to do a lot of the stuff that I have to do, and because there's very limited time to do those kind of things. So even just handling printing and having someone else have to worry about the printing. So for a lot of these projects that I do, in the beginning, I usually send out pitches, and it's usually blind, and they go to a submission email, and you never hear anything. And that deafening silence is, I guess I got rejected. Because I haven't quite hit the point where I know an editor's contact information and they're able to reject me via email, which is like, that's the goal, one day just to get rejected via email. So for Planet Gigantic, which is an all ages book, Action Lab was like definitely on the top of my list of someone that I thought would be a really good fit for it. I had heard of them through when Princeless had come out, and I took a look at that book, and I thought it was great. And I was like, I got to send them this thing. And to their credit, they got back to me pretty quickly. They liked what we saw. There's 4 issues that we put out through Action Lab. Before that, I had written a 0 issue, was like kind of like a prequel. That's available now digitally, but that was my pitch. That's what I had sent them. I wanted to send them a complete story with a beginning, middle, and an end, rather than just take 8 pages out of the first issue and use that as the pitch, because that's what I had always done prior. I had in my head it would be good, I could show them, I could tell a story, it'll be complete. If they don't go for it, I can still sell this thing and release this thing on my own. So that was the goal. So I sent them that, they picked it up, and that's where we ended up now.
We have about 3 minutes left. Time has really flown. So Action Lab is an all-age, well, actually they publish books for all ages, as you're saying, so they do have their Danger Lab imprint. What makes a good all-ages book?
To me, it's like, it just has to be a good book. So if it doesn't have straight up murder, a lot of language and sex, for me, it's all ages. You know what I mean? So when I was writing this, I didn't write it any differently than I would Dead Horse or even Animals. I just knew that there were certain things that weren't going to happen. I knew there was a certain person that I was writing for, and that was me when I was, 8 and 9 years old. So in that sense, it was definitely kid geared. But other than that, I think as long as you have a good story and as long as it's true and it's honest and it's rooted in human emotions and interactions and the things that we fear and love and everything else, then it's appropriate for all ages. I mean, when you're watching, a Pixar movie or something, that you can enjoy it at just about any age, but it's certainly appropriate for kids. So something like that I would consider to be, all ages.
That's a good point about Pixar, because it seems that when Pixar started making their films, that opened the door to all-age entertainment to be more than just, it's a movie you take your 5-year-old nephew to keep him quiet for an hour and a half.
Right.
Now it's something that you aren't going to be pulling your hair out when you're at the theater. And we start to see that now in the all-ages books as well, like Princeless, like you were saying, or even a book like Mouse Guard, which to me seems a little bit older than all ages, but I see that we have about a minute left. Planet Gigantic, you said the 4th issue is coming out soon?
The 4th issue, I think, is already in stores at this point. Last week or the week before it came out. So at this point, all 4 issues are out. If you want to check it out and you can't find them, you can get the trade, which I'm not sure when the date is out, but if you go to your comic store and you ask for the Planet Gigantic trade, it's called New World Home. They should be able to order it for you and you can get it. Maybe June or July for that. I don't know the date.
Okay, and if people wanted more information about your other books, maybe to contact you, do you have a website that we can share with the audience?
Sure. It's ericgrissom.com. And I will give you a heads up. Mostly it's just things I'm sharing that I like. But at the top on the nav, there's a writing link and there's a store link so you can buy any of the books or you can download some free comics that I posted up there.
Well, Eric, thank you so much for joining us on Comic Culture, and thank you so much to you at home watching. We'll see you again next time.
Thank you.